right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. As people are rolling on in, I'll do a brief kind of introduction. Thank you for attending our conversation, first of the month, around how to build a culture of diversity, equity, and inclusion from recruitment to retention. My name is Cristina, she, her. I'm the Senior Partnerships Manager here at All Voices. To set the stage for the conversation, we know that 67% of job seekers consider workplace diversity an important factor when considering different employment opportunities, and 50% of current employees want their workplace to increase their diversity. I would be remiss also if we didn't honor and celebrate that today is February 1st, and it is Black History Month here in the United States, and is also the first day of Chinese Lunar New Year. This webinar is hosted by All Voices, which is an employee feedback management platform. If you're not familiar, we empower employees to anonymously and safely provide feedback to their team, share positive input, and report things like bias, culture issues directly to their company leadership, and really create that culture of psychological safety. And then it's also in partnership with our partners at Findem. They turbocharge talent acquisition with AI from search to hire, and talent leaders from Fortune 100 companies to startups are using Findem to massively increase their talent pipeline, raise candidate quality and diversity, and their time to hire by 80%, great stat. If you'd like to search like you've never searched before and make amazing hires, reach out to Liv or request a demo on findem.ai to learn more. I will stop talking, and I would love our panelists to introduce themselves. If you could share name, pronouns, and a little bit about the work you do, and then we'll dive into the bulk of our conversation. Danita, I would love for you to go first, and I'll stop sharing our welcome screen.
So good morning, good afternoon, good day, depending on where you are, good evening. I am Danita Rucks. I am the Senior Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Leader here at RingCentral. The work that I do is important to me, and I know it's important to everyone that is attending this call. I intentionally set out to work on initiatives that champion diversity for the people here at RingCentral, building culture, building strategies that further diversity, equity, and inclusion, and infuse it into our everyday business strategy here. I've done a lot of work on programs such as a listening and healing room. We've done some initiatives with our ERGs. We have a robust list of ERGs that continues to grow and is very active here. I'm engaged in all of that with my team, and I'm just really excited about being here today and being able to talk through this very important and necessary topic.
Hi, everyone. Cristina Rivard here, she, her for my pronouns. And I'm one of our senior people leaders at TrueCar, which is an automotive tech company. And what I will say is that we have been, like many organizations, on a transformation as we've been riding the wave of the pandemic. And I don't know an HR professional who isn't also riding the same wave alongside. And so what I do sometimes ebbs and flows from day to day around what does the team need, what does our organization need, and quite frankly, what does the community need at a larger scale. On a day-to-day basis, though, my core is really around dynamic workplace and evolving our organization, as well as DEI. So I'm one of the founding members of our DEI advisory committee here at TrueCar, and also about creating enriching and sustainable career experiences for our employees. So I kind of have my hands in a few different pots, if you will, and I'm very excited to be here today with Danita and Cristina.
Awesome. Thank you both for being here and sharing a little bit about yourself and why you're here today. I dropped this in the chat, but for our audience members, if you ever have any questions, feel free to message us directly, drop it in the chat, or use the Q&A feature. To kick off our conversation, I'd love to start off by what we mean, or kind of the definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Danita, I'll pass to you first, but we'll love both of your thoughts on this.
Okay, so diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? So diversity to me, or for what we are doing here at RingCentral, is recognizing that we're all, I think so much emphasis is put on diversity, or focus is putting on diversity being different. And we are all different. We know that. But embracing the uniquenesses that we bring to the table, and all of us bring them to the table. So for me and for the company, the way we try to drive that is describing diversity as a unique attribute that we all bring to the table. And then for equity, the way I like to approach equity, because oftentimes people approach it from an equality standpoint, but it's about leveling things, right? Leveling the playing ground, and then closing that gender gap, closing wealth gaps, working on programs and strategies that enable us to do that, to ensure that we are compensating people appropriately. And then the inclusion aspect of that is ensuring that everybody has a seat at the table, and not only has a seat at the table, but everyone has a voice at the table. Everyone's recognized, everyone's included in the conversation. Oftentimes I have friends that are introverted because I'm exceptionally extroverted, and they'll be like, sometimes I don't want to talk, right? But you want to still feel included. And so you work through ways to ensure that they're included, that their ideas, their thoughts are brought to the table. So it's a mixture of all of that. I think every bit of it relies on the other to be successful, but that's how I approach and define diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, I would just add a few additional things. I think Danita did a really awesome job of explaining that when I talk about diversity, it's all the visible and invisible ways that we differ. I think a lot of times it tends to be how what people see about each other, but you can't see all of my disabilities. You can't see my religion. Maybe you can see my religion. You might not be able to know what my sexual orientation is or my gender identity is just by looking at me. So really kind of taking an expansive definition of it's both the visible and invisible ways. I'll also go a step further and say, I think there's also been a really deliberate focus and intention on how some of those differences have historically held people back in the workplace, and being really thoughtful about what we do from an equity and inclusion place so that truly everybody feels like they belong and they can thrive in the organization in addition to that. So for equity, similarly, there's a big difference between equality and equity. There's a great visual out there around bicycle. If you give everybody the same bicycle, but they're different heights, they have different abilities, somebody might need a hand bike, etc. Everybody can ride a bike, they just might need the right bike for them in order to be successful versus giving everyone the same bike. And then I 100% agree with what Danita said around inclusion. And I think ultimately the goal of inclusion is this sense of belonging. So not only am I at the table, but you say you want to hear my voice, but I actually believe that I belong at this table and that my seat is valid, just as valid as anybody else's at the table too.
And Cristina, I would add just to that, from a belonging sense, right? Because that's a big part of what I believe in, and I try to drive into everything we do. It's an experience, right? And so I belong to things now, right? I belong to organizations, I belong to my church, but do I experience belonging there? When I come home, I know I belong in my family. I experience a sense of being included and welcomed, and I'm okay being myself. That's what we want people to feel when they come into our organizations and our companies, that they can be absolutely who they are. And oh, by the way, in our industry, they've coined this, be your authentic self in that moment, right? Because who I am right now, might not be who I am when I when I get up and go see what my daughter's room looks like after she left. You notice, but in that moment that you can just be free to be exactly who you are. So I do try to talk through that with different ones here, people, leaders that I'm working with, that it's an experience. People have to experience it's almost tangible that you belong in this organization because you feel committed to it and you feel a part of it. You're dedicated to it.
Yeah.
No, I think that is definitely an important point. It's an experience. It's also thoughtful, as you were both talking about too. It's intentional. It doesn't just happen. So we definitely want to get specific around kind of how you ensure that people do at different parts of their life, different parts of their career, feel like they're part of, you know, the culture. Their opinion is valued. Let's start with the kind of recruiting process. Why is it important to really kind of showcase the inclusion and equity efforts of your organizations, and how do you tangibly do that? Anyone can answer first.
Danita, you want to kick us off?
I seem to be going first for everything. So I think diversity, equity, inclusion is important to people in this day. I think the last 2 years have really crystallized that for a lot of companies. People are not just people that are coming to work for you, but investors, your consumers. Everyone is very focused on these issues, on this particular area. And so I think when you're going through the recruiting process, that I find more and more that our candidates are asking for it. They're looking for representation. Are there people in leadership, in senior leadership, that look like me? Because what that tells me is that there's a chance for me to be in those positions, right? There's a chance for me to excel and my career aspirations to be fulfilled with your organization. So I think it's important that we have those conversations with candidates through the recruiting process, that we expose them to diverse people through the interview process. It shouldn't just be all white males or all white females. I mean, if you're hiring a Latino or Latinx individual, then they need to meet and talk with someone that can identify with their experience so that they can ask pointed questions that would help them feel comfortable about making this decision to join your organization. I think showcasing our ERGs, if you have employee resource groups and the work that they do, they are a viable part of the organization. They have a voice, right? And so this would help them know that, hey, I have a community which I can align with, that is going to make me feel comfortable, that's going to help me navigate this new space, that's going to help me when I encounter, you know, situations that I may not be familiar with. I can find mentors there. I can find friends there. So DEI is definitely a key component into drawing candidates into companies in this day, because the candidates are demanding it, even as much as we are in the company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really well said. I think there's a piece too where if you've truly embedded DEI top to bottom and how you're working as an organization, it shows up in your values. So
Mm-hmm.
There's a core piece of making sure that you're also hiring individuals that are going to support and lean in, regardless as to where they are on their journey for DEI, because we're all on a journey. There's no finish line. But that they're willing to kind of lean in and be vulnerable and have humility and care about the experience of their colleagues and all of that. And so it goes beyond, is this person really great at their job, but are they a good teammate? And so I think there's the two sides of it as well, of making sure that as you bring people in, they are also aligned to those values and see this as a priority as the org does.
Absolutely. Representation and values are important, creating the frameworks for people to succeed as well, and investing in those resources. We have a couple of questions from the audience I definitely want to ask as well. Cristina, this is for you because it's about the bike analogy. We have Elizabeth asking, how do you genuinely learn the specific type of bike that our employees need, especially when it's not required to share? I'm also going to add how you kind of ask folks in a psychologically safe and non-emotional labor way.
Yeah. It's a really good question. And I think there's two levels probably to all of these questions. There's the macro level. So how do you think about it systemically and create a culture, but also create processes and ways for people to do that? There's also the micro moments, and it may start with micro moments. So that's the human to human kind of everyday interaction. I think a big piece of the DEI work is just being curious and remaining open that there's probably multiple ways to do something. And that there isn't, in most of our work is knowledge work, there's not one right answer to it. So, you know, I would start with those micro moments. And I think this begins with a lot of modeling of behavior, but noticing who's participating, who isn't participating. And that can be data driven, right? You can look to see what's happening through your people processes and how they're showing up. And then be curious. Be curious who isn't involved. Why are they not having the same kind of results as other demographics might be having? And ask questions. And so you can do that through a focus group. If you don't have trust, it may be hard to get participation in that focus group. So a platform like an All Voices, I'll just plug it out there for you, is a great way to create an anonymous space for people to speak up and say, hey, here's why I'm not participating in this particular thing, or here's what I need in order to be successful. I know we saw a lot of this with parents, particularly early on in the pandemic. There was a lot of people had a lot of fear, very legitimate fear that they were going to lose their jobs, but they're also juggling kids at home, and life is just crazy. And so many people are scared to speak up and say, I can't do this, right? Because they don't want to lose their job as a result of not being able to have the same output as somebody who doesn't have to also juggle school-age children or young children. So I think also having managers get curious too on a day-to-day basis and ask questions, and it can start really simple of, hey, how's the team feeling today? Red, yellow, green, right? The top of a staff meeting. And making some of that normal to talk about, because many of us are still working from home, right? So, yeah.
I think that's important. Active listening, being curious, not being afraid to ask the questions, and hearing and listening to the response, acknowledging it, even if there's nothing you can do tomorrow, it's something that you are working on. Really communicating that and setting that expectation is important. We have a couple of questions around employee resource groups, and I do want to note this is part of the strategy. This is not the entire strategy of baking diversity, equity, and inclusion into your organization and operationalizing this. But Danita, I know you are an employee resource group founder at RingCentral. Can you share kind of the goal of your employee resource group and why it was important to really start that at RingCentral?
Well, ours started as a social group, and it was just a way to connect with other Black employees at RingCentral. So when I joined the company in 2018, someone saw me in the office and mentioned that there was this group of Black employees that was networking through our tool, which is our RCV and our MVP tool. And so I connected with them. And then out of that, we decided to have an outing, and that evolved into, hey, let's be intentional about gathering. Let's be intentional about raising our voice. Let's be intentional about our careers and how we progress and helping one another. And that's what we did. And so it evolved from there. And then George Floyd was murdered. And that just set everything on fire. And I believe every ERG just kind of started to speak up even more. I mean, I believe people were working together cohesively and collectively. The women in leadership were working together. And then we started our SASE because we're Sassy is our women's group, I'm sorry. And I had two thoughts going on there. And so we started that group and it just kept going. Our rainbow room for LGBTQ, A+, and then we have other ERGs, but I believe each one has created their own mission. Each one has created their own vision. We are working this year to stand them up, bringing them together to really formulate their ideas and find their voice and connect with our e-staff so that we can further influence DEI with the company, with our senior leadership, that we can get some sponsorship around issues that matter to the ERGs, that it's not just a social gathering. It's not just let's get together for these events, which are important because, as you know, today kicked off Lunar New Year and Black History Month. So those are very important to our ERGs, but they also have things that they want to see happen for their specific group and their specific concerns. So I think ERGs are necessary. Right? They're necessary in every company and organization. They're a tremendous source of information for leaders. They're a wealth of networking just for bringing people into the company, whether it's employees. We've brought in some powerhouse speakers into RingCentral through our different organizations, SASE and the Black employees at RingCentral and our Indigenous Peoples Group. I mean, they're all very active. So I think they're a vital part of creating that belonging experience for employees. I mean, they are, you know, they're the core of that healthy experience for candidates and employees that join the company.
Absolutely. And we do have a question around kind of the role of leaders in employee resource groups, but also the role of leaders in really being engaged in operationalizing diversity, equity, inclusion in their specific functions and process. Cristina, I know at TrueCar, there's a DEI advisory committee, I believe, and definitely want to ask around the role of leaders as well to be engaged too.
Yeah. You know, I think that when you're really set up for success, you have it at both sides, right? You have your senior leadership that can spearhead it and really legitimize the work. And then also having it from your individual contributors. So you kind of have these two beautiful things happening at the same time. That's really when the magic is going on. But leadership engagement is incredibly important. And what I would say here, I saw this great quote from a friend of mine, Jamie Miner, yesterday that says, "You can't talk butterfly to a caterpillar." And it made me think deeply about the work of DEI and the journey that we're all on, right? And recognizing that there's transformation that occurs along this journey itself. So if I share this, because if you're working with leaders who aren't where you want them to be, aren't speaking the language that you want them to speak, try to learn how to speak their language. You have to meet people where they are. This work is deeply personal. It's emotional. It touches us in ways that we don't always understand. We'll have these like knee-jerk reactions of like, "Ooh, I'm uncomfortable. I don't like that. That's scary," right? And so you can't convince somebody to do something different if they're in that state of mind. You have to meet them in a state of mind where their heart and their minds are actually open to having a legit conversation. So I offer that because I think a lot of times when people are asking that question, they're asking like, how do I get these leaders to do this work and make it real? Like, I can't do this work without them. So step one is like, get to know them, get to know what they care about, because everybody has a tie into this work. So again, that curiosity, that relationship building is really, really powerful. And then find the people that are advocates. You don't need everybody, but you do need a core group, and you need the right core group. So we have a couple of different things that are happening at a leadership level. One is our entire executive team has been going through a series of workshops together we have 6 workshops outlined, and this is really about supporting them on their personal journey, really meeting them where they're at, helping them build skills, opening their eyes to conversations they may not have historically had. Then we have a subset team, which is really focused on the business intersection with all of this work. So we think about DEI through 3 pillars: team, community, and business, right? And this group is really charged with answering the question of, what does DEI mean at TrueCar? So how does this touch how we operate our business, what decisions we make, what products and services we have out there? So we're very lucky because our CEO is quite invested in this work. So he's a part of it. We have our Chief Consumer Officer. We have our head of product. We have one of our senior leaders on our dealer team, myself, and then also Tiffany Hamilton, who's a part of my team as well. And so a small group to really kind of go deep and digest this, while we're also kind of helping these leaders on their own journey, is really important. And many of these leaders are already naturally thinking, because they're already bought in, how do I integrate this into my work? So when I think about being the Chief Consumer Officer, well, who is our consumer? Do we want to expand the definition of the makeup of our consumer? Okay, well, what would it look like to bring that to life? I guess my advice that I would offer is, as much as possible, try to bring as many people along, but find your advocates, lean into the advocates, and sometimes starting small and allowing it to grow from there is much more digestible than trying to take on the entire transformation, because this is long, hard work that takes time.
It definitely takes time, and having these conversations and having them again is really important, making that investment. I think this question is also really interesting because it asks about leadership and unpaid labor and all of these questions. So I want to ask from Gabby, how do we talk to leadership and make them invested in diversity, equity, and inclusion without forcing marginalized folks to do an enormous amount of emotional / unpaid labor? I will say, pay them, ideally compensate these folks. But Danita, I'll pass this question to you first, because I know you work with leaders all of the time and are a leader yourself. What are your thoughts about creating the time and space for this non-emotional labor?
You know, I love what Cristina said about meeting people where they are, because everyone is at a different part of the journey. And it is very emotional work. This is hard work, and therefore it's hard work to do. And there are some people that are easier to talk to and that are invested and can see it and crystallize it, you know, just immediately. And there are other people that don't necessarily see a need for it or don't see it as clearly. And I think it's because we're all processing. That's diversity. We're all processing through our own experiences. We're all processing through our own perspectives. So my perspective as an African-American or Black woman is going to be totally different than someone's perspective as a white male or an Asian female. It's different because our life experiences are different. So a lot of what I do and a lot of what I believe is it's about relationship. And if you don't get to know people, you can't really have that conversation. So sometimes that's why DEI, and I love also that Cristina said there's no destination, or you said there's no finish line, right? I always say there's no destination, right? So if you think that there's something we're going to get to and it's going to be resolved, we're not. We're not here to change people's minds. We're not here to make people believe something different, but we are here to educate and expose them to information that they may not have known before, to help them facilitate conversations that might be difficult, courageous conversations, right? To help them understand people that aren't like them and consider something that you haven't had to consider before. And I think that applies to everyone. So for me, Cristina, sometimes it's about stepping back and figuring out where that person is, and then where can I plug in, right? Where do you find the common ground? We have a program that we do here with our ERGs and people that want to participate. You don't have to be an ERG member, called the Listening and Healing Room. And that's a space, a safe space that you can come into and be vulnerable and share your life experiences, something that could have happened to you at work, growing up, what have you, as and your authentic self. And you share that with people in the meeting and people in the company. So this year we're taking it to a new level. And we're doing a series called the Listening and Healing Room, Common Ground, because now what we'll do is get people to come into this space and share their information. The other people will read what they write up, and then we've got to find the common ground that we can start to facilitate and build bridges and build relationships on, because we have so much more in common than we're different, but we constantly home in on the differences, right? And so if we can find the thing that's common, you can build from there. And I take that same premise and I apply it when I'm doing strategic work with leaders. What do we have in common that we can build upon? Like, there's a leader that I've spoken with recently outside of the company, right? But this was a lady I spoke to. The thing that we had, and we were as complete opposite as we could possibly be. The thing we had in common, we're both parents to special needs children. And that's where we started the conversation. And then we were able to talk about things that were important to us. And I believe it's that same kind of nuance you have to bring to this role in these strategic conversations with leaders. And it's about active listening, right? Let them talk first. You don't have to go in there with your platform and sell them on anything. They already know why you're there. Hear where they are, and then figure out what their needs are with them, and then help them try to solution for those. But find that common ground. I think that's key in those conversations.
Finding common ground, setting up the time and space to have these conversations, not slacking or setting up meetings on people's calendar to ask their feedback and not being related to their performance, not being related to anything that they do. Definitely not what we want. So I think those are really good examples. This always comes up in these conversations around metrics. What's not measured is not done. And we have talked about, both of you have, how diversity, equity, inclusion is not a destination, it's a journey. And we don't want to look to check boxes here, but we do want things to be measured because we want them to be invested in. So how should we think about measuring and tracking the success via data of diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts? Is it just having these facilitation spaces? Is it having these conversations? This is an audience question.
I can take a crack at that. I will tell you, we put a lot of weight into our engagement surveys. We do an annual employee engagement survey, and we do ask very specific questions around the topics of DEI. And we also do collect demographic data to understand if there's nuance in that as well. I think at the end of the day, you also have to understand what are your specific goals, because diversity in one function may look very different than diversity in another function. At TrueCar, we have a very stereotypically heavy women-dominated HR team. And so it's great. I love working with a lot of really awesome, talented women. But when we think about what does diversity of thought look like in this space, and making sure that we have enough of the right perspectives and lived experiences when we're making decisions, that may be something that we take into consideration, versus other parts of the organization, it looks really different. So I do think that you have to figure out what is it that does matter, back to your original statement here, and measure those things, and then get curious. So like with our engagement survey, we're still in the middle of wrapping it up, but I really think about it in 3 phases. 1, ask the questions. 2, actually have dialogue with employees based on the questions. So use that to then have focus group conversations and go deeper and really understand the nuance of it. And then you have to have really solid follow through. And that is one way to start establishing trust in an organization, You wanted my opinion, you asked follow-up questions, and now you're doing something about it. And now you're gonna, again, survey me to see, did you do what you said you were gonna do, right? And so that cycle of continuous feedback with your employees is really important. So we use that as a big way to understand what's going on in the organization, and do our employees believe that this work is real, and not that it's real, but it's actually having meaningful experience in their day-to-day life. So it's an easy step in, I think, if you're looking to start measuring things, is take a consideration at your employee engagement survey.
You want to know how you're doing, you have to ask the people on your team and working at your organization, and continue to ask these really thoughtful questions and make sure that all the avenues are open, because not everybody is going to share their opinions on all hands in front of everybody at the organization. We do have a couple questions, Danita, around the listening and healing room as well. In a virtual world, is it a Slack channel, a set meeting? And also, is a trained counselor present, or is it purely employee facilitated? Can you clarify?
So it is RingCentral's product MVP that we, an RCB that we function off of. And we do have a trained facilitator because people are going into some very vulnerable places and emotional places when they're sharing. So we want to make certain, number one, that they have that support there, and number two, that they have an opportunity to process with the trained facilitator or counselor that we utilize for this program. So yes, it's been successful to the point that, you know, people are asking if we do it once a quarter. They want to do it more often. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of emotional work, right? And so, I mean, to dive into that on a monthly basis, you really need someone that can just really facilitate that regularly. But I think what we're doing now is beneficial for where we are, because again, and we're going to probably say this maybe 10 more times, Cristina and I, we're on a journey, right? And so this is where we're starting. I don't know what things will look like next year. We might be at a place in a year where we're doing it monthly. I would love that. You know, the more people are engaged, the more you know it's effective. And Cristina, if you don't mind, I'd like to just go back. I saw one question about ERGs. How do we utilize our ERGs to help new hires? So I just wanted to share that we did a program last year, raised up a program called Transition into Tech. And we brought in apprentices that had completed a boot camp study in cybersecurity, data analytics, product and design, UX, UI. And so we found these diverse or underrepresented employees or apprentices that we brought into our program, or a program we designed. And the way we utilize the ERGs, because I try to look at everything from a holistic perspective, it's not just giving people an opportunity, right? But then how do we give back it as ERGs? So we assigned them 2 mentors from our Black employee resource group, because the group that we brought in the first phase were African American. So our Black employee resource group, 2 mentors from there, as well as 2 mentors in the business. So they had 4 mentors for these 4 months of working with us and their managers' feedback. We did weekly surveys to get feedback on the apprentices. We did weekly surveys with the apprentices to get feedback from the mentors, on the mentors rather, so that we knew how to stand them up and make sure that they could succeed in their role. And those are the type of things we do. We also started a Black Gold speaker series. So we brought in speakers like Carla Harris from Morgan Stanley, Diane Billings-Buford, who is the CEO of Rise organization. Gosh, we've had so many, but really good speakers that could come in and give some quality conversation to our apprentices, as well as our entire RingCentral. We don't just keep that centralized to the ERGs, we open that up to the entire company. And we've gotten tremendous feedback on those programs and the things that we've executed there. So we're really proud of that because we want to make sure that people are situated to succeed.
that's a really holistic approach. And I appreciate that you answered that question, because it's not just having mentorship. It's not just about having employee resource group. It's in speakers. It's all about kind of that holistic approach. And what you said, setting people up for success so they can achieve. You're investing resources, time, this space. I think that is critical to success. We also have another kind of anonymous question around how to get leadership involved with diversity, equity, inclusion. And I'm going to add that for everybody, not just leadership, where resources are limited and they're already stretched thin. Where can people start at the beginning if we're talking about the journey as they're growing the team?
I can take a stab at that. I think it'll depend a little bit on the dynamic of that team and what it looks like and what's important at that particular point in time. But you certainly, with any of this, you have to make it sticky, meaning like, I don't know how to, it's a term I use all the time. Like it just has to be something that really stays with people. And it has to be easy. Right? If you're strapped for time, like how do you make it easy? And when I say easy, make it obvious, make it fun, make it interesting. There's a whole bunch of different ways that you could describe easy. You know, for a group that's just starting to get to know each other and is having to rely a lot on trust to make decisions quickly. So if you're in startup mode, you want to have a high degree of trust. You know, making time and space just to get to know each other. And I heard this really awesome example. We're going to try this within my own team, but have everybody at your next staff meeting have one person at your next staff meeting bring a picture. It can be a picture of anything. It could be a picture of their mom. It could be a picture of landscape. It could be a picture of them at the finish line with their medals from their last marathon, whatever it is. And for 3 to 4 minutes, have them tell a little story about that picture as a way to get to know each other. I would say the only requirement would be that it's not work related, right? And people can go as deep as they want with that, right? They could tell this moving story about how their maternal grandmother raised them and was this solid figure in their life, and you know, she just passed away and they're coping with their grief, blah, blah, blah. Like it could be something really powerful in that way, and that person could have a really vulnerable moment with their team, and that's kind of a step into seeing people beyond just, you know, your Zoom interactions, if you will. So you know, there's a bunch of different ways to go at it. I would say, what is most important for your team right now, and how might that scale as your team grows and evolves, and integrate it into a current ritual that you have. So whether it's a staff meeting or whatever it may be, so that it's easy.
I like the integration into a current ritual, again, operationalizing equity and processes. I know we've had questions around leaders, managers, and employee resource groups, but no matter where you are, what level, department of the organization, you have the opportunity to make your processes more inclusive, more equitable, and really be a champion for change. I know a lot of organizations have started adding pronouns to their email signatures. This healthcare organization changed their benefits from like maternity leave and other kind of benefits to just a blanket family forming benefit. So that includes all kinds of parents and how you're forming your organization. And it just makes people feel like they are included in the conversation. So I do want to ask, what are other actions that can be taken, you know, tomorrow, or do not take, you know, a year or two, even though we know sustainable change happens in that time, to set up an inclusive space in their environment, no matter where they are in the organization. What are kind of both of your thoughts on that? Actions we can take?
Well, a couple of things that we've done. Our employee programs team put together a initiative called Hello RingCentral, where you sign up to meet with someone randomly in the company and get to know people. And it's been very productive and helpful, especially in this COVID environment, right? We're all home all the time, where a lot of us may have gone into the office. my prior role to RingCentral, I worked at home for 20 years. So being home for me, sliding into that was not difficult, but for some people it is, right? They don't want to necessarily be home all the time. They need that interaction, that social connection that you get in the office. So this has helped us in that space. And it's also helped you get to know people. You can meet with people on your team, meet with people you might not have known, you know, or would not even have an opportunity to know. Another program or initiative that we did here is a reverse, and this was a pilot, a reverse mentoring program. So someone from the C-suite reached out and said, hey, they saw me on I don't know, some webinar, and they said, I wanted to see if you would be interested in a reverse mentorship. And I was like, really? Really, you're on the six? Okay. And it's turned into an amazing partnership. So now it's thought leadership around how we can infuse DEI into the company. What strategies can we come up with? How can we help her organization grow and become more diverse in thought? Because it's a technical side of the business. We talk about things like when YouTube had that situation years ago where all of those engineers, when they started uploading videos, and all of the engineers that were working on that were right-handed. So when left-handed people started uploading videos, they didn't come out right. I mean, it just fuels the whole need for diversity in the workspace, because had they had left-handed engineers in the room, it would have saved them a ton of money when they had to go back and rework that. So diverse characters, such as being left-handed. My daughter's a lefty, right? And so those things are often overlooked unless someone's in the room representing that particular characteristic. And I think when you have these type of programs that facilitate that, like this reverse mentorship, you learn things, and then it makes it even more relevant for you when you're working in this space and you're trying to drive the purpose behind why this is so necessary in this day.
I love that. I would add just a very simple what you and any role can do, which is a simple question of what's one thing I can do to be a better colleague or a better partner, right? I think oftentimes we have to create this space that allows people to say, here's what I need. You know, you call a lot of meetings without the agenda. Do you mind putting the agenda in it? Or sometimes I don't feel ready to answer a question on the spot, or whatever it may be, or I'm not sure that you move on very quickly and I have an idea, but I didn't get to share it, whatever it may be, but it starts to create space. And then what I would say is how you respond to that is where you build trust, because it takes a lot, particularly if you're in a position of authority of any sort with this individual. And even if you're not, it takes a lot of courage for someone to say, you know what, I really do want you to do something differently, particularly if you don't have that trust. So what it is, how you respond in that moment is so important. And if it catches you off guard, take a breath and say, oh, wow, I didn't realize that was really important to you. Can I think about that a little bit more? Or I'd like to talk to you about that a little bit more, and then come back to them, right? So trying to avoid any defensiveness when you're opening yourself up for feedback. But I think when we start to do that and start to say, I care about being a good teammate to you, and what matters to you is this platinum rule. I want to do as you want me to do, not how I want things to be done for me, right? So anybody can do that in any role, in any position. It's just genuine curiosity of how can I be a better teammate? How can I be a better ally to you? Because we're all allies to each other in some capacity. So yeah, in addition to kind of the system-wide things.
I think those are really good questions to ask. And Danita, to your point as well, who's in the room, who's not in the room, who are we designing for? Just questions that you can ask yourself as well, whether you are a formal or informal leader within an organization. Your actions are being noted by people who are on your team and who you work with. I know we were talking about kind of the individual onus of having that equity-driven mindset and making change, but we do have, as we're nearing the end of our conversation, we have two more questions left. Thinking about inclusion, how do you think about the balance of what an individual can do and what has to be looked at in the organization's policies that are system-wide? So from a systemic perspective, beyond the individual scope. And I think that's an interesting question because there is that difference between what is possible for one person to do and what you really do need your advocates for, what you really do need your CEO or your executives buy-in from. How do you both kind of think about balancing those two things?
That's a good question. It's hard to answer, I think, in the abstract, because I think you have to understand a little bit more of the context around some of it. I guess what I would say is, as you do this work, as you do any work, you have to be able to prioritize and know what are the big rocks to move, what are and invest time and energy and really moving those versus trying to do everything and be everything to everyone. And that can be really hard in the DEI space because DEI touches everything, literally, right? So you could be running around chasing your tail all day long, figuring out, how do I solve this problem? How do I solve this? And you can't. There's just not enough time, right? So I think some of it is being able to prioritize, and through that prioritize what needs to be dealt at a system level versus what is more localized or can be dealt with through a localized solution. And some of it is also being okay with you're not going to solve everything. Like, this is lifelong work. Though I will be practicing this for forever. Because we're all evolving, becoming more aware of different identities and experiences that we may not have been aware of. The world is changing, and as the world changes, we as humans change. And so what was true before, it couldn't be, may not be true today, and likely won't be true tomorrow, right? So I guess there's some of it of like, find some peace around the fact that you're not going to do it all. Try to ruthlessly prioritize, have acceptance around the things that are going to be system-wide versus can be solved through localized efforts. So
I would say ditto. I love that you said, Cristina, that you're just not going to solve for everything. And there are some days that I literally have to tell myself and remind myself of that I can't fix it all, you know? And so you focus on what you can be effective in, you work to put good policy and practices in place, you work to share that with leaders from the top down, but you also have to do that same work from the bottom up. Like, I'm a big grassroots person. I think top down is necessary. We know that it works when it comes to giving out things for people to do and accomplish. So it definitely works for DEI. Top down, it has to be there, that commitment, but it also has to be infused from the bottom up, because from top down, it'll never get down to the bottom. So you have to do that work from both ways. That it's a tremendous work effort every day, and you encounter different situations because, to your point, Cristina, we are evolving, and what matters to one person in, let's say, Germany is not going to be the same thing that's as important to someone in Manila. You know, we're a global company, so DEI in the US, where we can identify ethnicity and gender, is not necessarily the same situation when we talk to our colleagues in China, when we talk to our colleagues in Manila, right? And so it's broader than just being able to fix it. Because if this thing could have been fixed, it would have been fixed. It DEI to me is the lifeblood of everything the business does. And you don't see the lifeblood, right? It should flow into everything. But that is a process. It's a progression of driving that through education, through inclusion training for managers so that they really know how to be inclusive. Some managers just know how to manage what it is that they do. They don't necessarily know how to include people. So you have to sometimes teach leaders how to lead. And to your point, listening, that active listening, being willing to have those courageous conversations with people that report to you, right? And might tell you, listen, you talk too much. You're really all over the place for me. I need you to be a little bit more succinct and concise in your delivery. That's hard to hear. But if you can have those conversations, you really can start to gain trust with people and build good, solid teams that is appreciative of everyone's differences. And they'll appreciate yours even more.
I have some great analogies going on in this conversation: lifeblood, the bicycle, the caterpillar. I definitely want to ask, in terms of those courageous conversations, someone asked us and wanted to know, while having difficult conversations and someone offends the other person, even though that is not the intention, what are steps to suggest and begin that recovery process, whether you are a manager or a peer?
Own it. Own it. I mean, we're human, right? And so if you tell me I offended you in my conversation, please be upfront with me, because oftentimes people aren't aware of what they're doing. I think when you make room for people to just be human, and know that some people just aren't even aware of it. And I'm guilty of saying, oh, they knew exactly what they were doing, not necessarily at work, or it could be an outside occurrence. But you know what? Someone could be saying the same thing about me when I really wasn't aware of what I was doing. So I will, if someone tells me that I've done something or said something, and trust me, in this space, we are always, you wouldn't think we were. And maybe Cristina might be like, no, I don't. But we are always like wondering. I'm so aware now, like, oh, wait a minute. Can I say that? Should I have said it that way? Because you're so focused on trying not to offend. But you know what? Sometimes you might just offend so that you can be educated, and then you'll know better for the next time. But I own it, take responsibility for it, apologize sincerely. And every time that I've done that, I've not had a problem. I don't want to make it sound like I do this on a regular basis. Sorry, Cristina. But
no.
The times that it's happened, I've not had a problem.
Yeah. There's also some really good bystander training that's out there, some free bystander training. I'm trying to remember the name of the org to kind of lift them up. They're escaping me right now, but as a response to the Asian American hate crimes and rhetoric that was going on, there was a great organization that came out that was doing a whole bunch of bystander training. So there's some easy phrases too. So if you're witnessing it, and maybe you're not in a position of authority, or you are and you're just super uncomfortable and you don't know what to do, I would highly recommend seeking out some of that training too, so that you can figure out how to intervene in that. There's in some situations, they say, like, take care of the person who was hurt first, tend to that person first versus the person who may have done the hurting, intentional or unintentional. But also, there's a lot of nuance in this of like being able to read the room, what's the trust in that situation and all of that. Yay, thanks Francis for putting it in there. Yeah, there's lots of good stuff in that. And I think the last thing that I just want to say, Cristina, because I know we're almost at time here, is the role of allies is so important here, both in this topic and in the work of someone else was asking earlier around the ERGs or convincing leaders and the burden of responsibility. Like, having know who those allies are, know when to call on them, and they need to, we're all allies, we need to show up and do the work for other people too. yeah, allies play a major, major role in sharing the responsibility. And quite frankly, I think a lot of times are the ones that really can help get it done.
Awesome. Well, you are right, Danita and Cristina, we are at time. There is a lot to discuss, a lot of unanswered questions, and a lot that was answered here as well. Thank you so much for being on this webinar in partnership with All Voices and Findem. For folks who are listening, thank you for attending. The recording will be live on our site within a week. Feel free to share it with your friends and colleagues, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.